The Battle of Lexington and Concord. The shot heard around the world. Prologue. A morning that changed history. April 19, 1775. A pale light crept across the fields of Massachusetts. The world was waking in silence. Birds stirred, farm animals shifted in their pens, the mist clung low to the ground. But in the small town of Lexington, there was no peace. On the village green, 77 men stood in formation, muskets trembling in their hands. They were not soldiers trained for war. They were farmers, carpenters, blacksmiths, men who had kissed their wives and children only moments before, not knowing if they would ever return. Across from them marched the most disciplined army in the world, nearly 800 British soldiers, their red coats flashing in the dawn, their bayonets glinting like cold fire. The two lines faced each other. No one moved. No one spoke. Then, a single shot cracked through the morning air. No one knows who fired it. But that single gunshot echoed across continents and centuries. It was the shot heard around the world. The years of tension. To understand that shot, we must go back. For more than a decade, the American colonies had lived under a tightening fist. The British Empire, victorious from costly wars in Europe, sought to recoup its losses by taxing its colonies. Stamps, paper, tea, sugar, all taxed without a voice from the colonists themselves. In the taverns of Boston, in the meeting halls of Virginia, and around the firesides of New England, a question burned: how long could a people be governed without a say in their own future? No taxation without representation was more than a slogan. It was a demand for dignity. The British answered not with compromise, but with soldiers. Redcoats patrolled colonial streets. Soldiers lodged in private homes. Disobedience was punished swiftly. The Boston Massacre of 1770, when 5 colonists were shot dead by British troops, turned simmering anger into fury. Trust was gone. The bond between Britain and its colonies was breaking. The spark at Boston Harbor. In December of 1773, defiance boiled over. Under the cover of night, men disguised as Mohawk Indians slipped aboard ships in Boston Harbor. With deliberate purpose, they hurled hundreds of chests of British tea into the icy water. The Boston Tea Party was no mere protest. It was a declaration. The colonists would no longer be silent subjects. The British struck back with force. They closed the port of Boston, choking its lifeblood of trade. They stripped Massachusetts of its ability to govern itself. They sent more soldiers. These laws, known in England as the Coercive Acts, were known in America by another name, the Intolerable Acts. Instead of cowing the people into submission, they united the colonies in defiance. The gathering storm. By early 1775, war felt inevitable. Militias formed across New England, ordinary men drilling in open fields, preparing for the day when resistance would no longer be enough. They became known as Minutemen, ready to fight at a moment's notice. In barns and cellars, weapons and ammunition were hidden, stockpiled in secret caches, far from the eyes of the Crown. British generals in Boston knew this. And they knew where much of the powder and shot was kept, in the town of Concord, just 20 miles away. The decision was made. On the night of April 18th, British troops would march into the countryside, seize the weapons, and snuff out the rebellion before it could catch fire. The Midnight Riders. But the colonists had prepared for this moment. Watching from Boston's North Church Tower, patriots lit lanterns to signal the British advance, 1 if by land, 2 if by sea. Across the Charles River, riders mounted their horses. Paul Revere galloped into the darkness, joined by William Dawes and Samuel Prescott. Their mission was simple and desperate: to rouse the countryside before the British arrived. At every farmhouse they passed, they shouted the warning, "The regulars are coming!" Dogs barked, windows opened, church bells began to toll. Muskets were pulled from above mantels, powder horns filled. The alarm spread like wildfire. By dawn, the entire countryside was awake. The stand at Lexington. When the British reached Lexington just after sunrise, they found militia waiting. 77 men, outnumbered 10-1. Captain John Parker, their commander, gave a solemn order: "Stand your ground. Don't fire unless fired upon. But if they mean to have a war, let it begin here." The British commander ordered the colonists to disperse. For a moment, silence. Then a shot. No one knows who fired it. But in an instant, muskets roared, bayonets lunged, smoke rolled across the green. When it cleared, 8 colonists were dead, 10 more wounded. The redcoats cheered, believing they had broken the militia. But they were wrong. Concord, the rebellion fights back. The British marched on to Concord, searching barns and homes for weapons. But at the North Bridge, they met something unexpected: hundreds of militia, gathered from surrounding towns. This time, the colonists did not stand and wait. They advanced. A volley of musket fire tore through the morning air. British soldiers fell. The redcoats reeled back in shock. For the first time, the King's army had been forced to retreat. The stand at Lexington. When the British reached Lexington just after sunrise, they found militia waiting. 77 men, outnumbered 10-1. Captain John Parker, their commander, gave a solemn order: "Stand your ground. Don't fire unless fired upon. But if they mean to have a war, let it begin here." The British commander ordered the colonists to disperse. For a moment, silence. Then a shot. No one knows who fired it. But in an instant, muskets roared, bayonets lunged, smoke rolled across the green. When it cleared, 8 colonists were dead, 10 more wounded. The redcoats cheered, believing they had broken the militia. But they were wrong. Concord, the rebellion fights back. The British marched on to Concord, searching barns and homes for weapons. But at the North Bridge, they met something unexpected: hundreds of militia, gathered from surrounding towns. This time, the colonists did not stand and wait. They advanced. A volley of musket fire tore through the morning air. British soldiers fell. The redcoats reeled back in shock. For the first time, the King's army had been forced to retreat. The long retreat. The retreat to Boston became a nightmare. Along every mile of the road, the countryside erupted with gunfire. From behind trees, stone walls, and fences, militias poured musket balls into the British ranks, then melted away before they could be caught. The Red Column staggered, exhausted, harassed at every turn. Ambush after ambush. By the time they reached Boston, nearly 300 British soldiers were dead, wounded, or missing. The colonists, too, had paid in blood, but they had done the unthinkable. They had stood against the greatest army in the world and lived to tell of it. Dawn of Revolution. The battles of Lexington and Concord were more than skirmishes. They were a spark. News spread swiftly through the colonies, carried by riders, printed in newspapers, whispered in taverns. Ordinary farmers had faced down redcoats, and won. The message was clear: Britain's rule could be resisted. Within weeks, militias from every colony poured into Massachusetts, laying siege to Boston. What had begun as a protest over taxes was now a war for independence. And across the Atlantic, in London, shock turned to fury. The colonies were no longer rebellious children to be scolded. They were enemies. A new world was beginning to take shape, forged in fire, in sacrifice, and in the courage of ordinary men. Ending. On that April morning, a handful of farmers, blacksmiths, and shopkeepers stood against an empire. They could not have known that their defiance would ignite a revolution, or that their musket fire would echo across the centuries. But from Lexington and Concord, a flame was lit. A flame that would grow into a war for liberty, and give birth to a new nation. The shot heard around the world was more than the crack of a musket. It was the sound of a people rising to claim their destiny. And so it began, with smoke on a village green, with the courage of farmers who dared to stand against an empire. From that single morning in April, the course of history was forever changed. If you want to uncover more untold stories of how ordinary people shaped the destiny of nations, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Together, we'll keep bringing history's most powerful moments back to life.